extreme wealth, political division, endless wars. History does not call this a coincidence. It calls it a phase, tells us that the average empire only lives for 250 years. Rome, Persia, America, no empire since the dawn of time has had the ability to fend off history repeating itself. The Fate of Empires was an essay written in 1978 by a man named Sir John Glubb. A British general and historian, his studies led him down the history of the Assyrians, Romans, Arab caliphates, Ottomans, and British Empire. He found that all went through similar life cycles and lasted around 200 to 300 years in their dominant form. This did not necessarily mean the empire would collapse and cease to exist. It just lost the power it had in its prime. Sir Glubb highlights and groups various stages in an empire's life. The Age of Pioneers shows the survival, discipline, and unity needed to lay the foundation of what would become an empire. The Age of Conquest shows military success and confidence. The empire begins to expand. The Age of Commerce highlights the growth of wealth and trade. The Age of Affluence brings about comfort and luxury at the cost of inequality. The Age of Intellect shows us culture, debate, and bureaucracy. The final stage is the Age of Decadence, sometimes referred to as decay. This stage begins to divide the empire, causes overreach, and a loss of shared identity. The 250-year lifespan depicts an empire's dominance, not necessarily its existence. For example, Rome went from a republic to an empire. It then later fell in 476 AD, but continued to exist for another 1,000 years as the Byzantine Empire or Eastern Roman Empire. The British Empire very much still exists today, but lost its colonies and is no longer the global giant it once was. Empires can last for over 1,000 years, but at the 250-year mark, they typically lose the power/influence they once had during their peak. The year is 753 BC, and this is you, a humble farmer making his way through life. You hear about a newly established city bustling with opportunity. Its name, Rome, a small city-state built on discipline, a strong military, and loyalty to the state. This is its Age of Pioneers. We fast forward through nearly 500 years, the Roman Republic had conquered Italy, Carthage, Greece, Spain, and large parts of the Mediterranean, the Age of Conquest. The year is now 44 BC, and a man named Julius Caesar was declared dictator perpetuo, or dictator for life. We fast forward some more years and some backstabbing, and we end up at 27 BC. Julius Caesar's adopted son, Augustus Caesar, had now ascended to his late father's position. At this point, he declares Rome an empire and becomes the first Roman emperor. This marks the beginning of what is widely considered Rome's 200-year-long peak, called Pax Romana. In the year 117 AD, Rome reached its greatest territorial peak, with massive trade networks, roads, and cities. Wealth flowed into Rome from taxes and conquered lands. This is its ages of commerce and affluence. After around 200 years, we end up at the year 180 AD. The emperor, Marcus Aurelius, passes away, marking the end of Pax Romana. We now enter the ages of intellect and decadence. Political instability ran rampant, and emperors were constantly overthrown, assassinated, or replaced with generals. With no clear system for succession, civil wars broke out every few decades, weakening the nation more than foreign invasions did. The loyalty to the Roman state, which once aided Rome in its rise to power, shifted to whoever paid the army. This massive military spending took a toll on the Roman economy, coupled with high taxes, which crushed farmers and the middle class, as well as a decline in trade due to the deterioration of roads and security, was a clear indication of economic collapse. Rome was a massive territory, with borders that stretched thousands of miles. Communication and troop movement were slow, making defending every frontier near impossible. As the years went on, the army began to rely more and more on mercenaries than Roman civilians, and loyalty to Rome itself had weakened. The Roman Empire eventually split into two: the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire, also called the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire was wealthier and more stable, while the Western Empire was not. A few years after the split, the Western Empire fell, and while the Eastern Empire lasted for another 1,000 years, the mighty Roman Empire that ruled much of the known world was gone. We now enter the year 559 BC. A man named Cyrus the Great becomes the king of Persia, modern-day Iran. Persia was a small vassal kingdom under the Median Empire, but just 9 short years after becoming king, Cyrus rebelled and overthrew the Medes. Uniting the Persians and Medes, the rule of the Achaemenid Empire had begun. This represents the age of pioneers. Under Darius I, the Achaemenid Empire grew to its greatest extent. The largest empire that the world had ever seen at the time, controlling territory from India all the way to the Mediterranean. The empire built extensive roads, enabling trade and control with the standardization of taxes and currency, representing the ages of conquest, commerce, and affluence. At its height, the Persian Empire was the most advanced nation the world had ever seen, with an incredibly efficient system of administration. The empire established governors called satraps, who standardized taxes and a shared currency that kept the empire running smoothly. Its strength came from a strong central authority and loyal local elites who helped maintain order. Like many other empires of the past, this strength gradually began to fade, and after Xerxes, Persian rulers were short-lived, inexperienced, or controlled by powerful figures behind the scenes. The kings became more distant as governors became semi-independent. As power shifted away from capable rulers, decision-making slowed down. Court politics and internal strife became more common, pulling the empire apart from the inside. Once the center of the empire began to weaken, the entire system began to fall apart. Local revolts in regions such as Egypt became more and more frequent. While its early armies were flexible and innovative, later armies became dependent on mercenaries, large in number, but much less loyal to the state. These constant revolts drained defense and resources, and it began to evolve more slowly than its enemies. Heavy taxation caused resentment amongst the working class, and the wealth collected stayed within the elite. With Persia already stretched thin and divided, the arrival of Alexander the Great was the final blow needed to end the once prosperous empire. Upon his arrival, some regions didn't even bother to resist. Rather, they welcomed him as an alternative leader, marking the end of the Persian Empire. We fast forward to 1526, when Babur, a Central Asian ruler, invaded northern India and won the First Battle of Panipat. His army used gunpowder weapons and organized battlefield tactics that many regional forces weren't prepared for. That victory laid the foundation for what would become one of the most powerful empires in South Asian history. Then comes the age of commerce and affluence. Under emperors like Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, the empire stabilized and grew wealthy. Akbar's policy of religious tolerance and integration of Hindu Rajput elites into government strengthened internal unity. Administration became more structured, taxation was organized efficiently, trade expanded significantly, especially in textiles and agricultural goods. The empire became one of the richest in the world at that time. Enormous agricultural revenue funded a strong military and monumental architecture, including the Taj Mahal. This was the height of Mughal confidence and material prosperity. Glubb argues that after affluence often comes the age of intellect and then decadence, where expansion slows, internal divisions increase, and maintaining the empire becomes harder than building it. That shift becomes visible under Aurangzeb. He ruled for nearly 50 years and expanded the empire to its greatest territorial size. On the surface, that looks like strength. But the expansion required constant military campaigns, especially in the Deccan. The army was stretched thin, and the treasury faced heavy strain. At the same time, Aurangzeb reversed several of the earlier tolerant policies. Religious taxes were reintroduced, and relations with key groups like the Rajputs and Sikhs deteriorated. Rebellions increased. Suppressing unrest required more money and more troops. The economy began weakening. The empire relied heavily on agricultural taxes, but prolonged warfare disrupted farming and trade. Corruption and tax collection increased. Peasants were overburdened, and productivity declined in several regions. After Aurangzeb's death in 1707, the decline accelerated. A series of weaker emperors followed. Real authority shifted to nobles and provincial governors. Regions like Bengal acted independently, and the Marathas expanded their power. The empire was fragmenting. Foreign invasions further weakened the center. In 1739, Nadir Shah sacked Delhi and carried away immense wealth, damaging Mughal prestige. Afghan invasions followed soon after. During this fragmentation, the British East India Company expanded its political influence. After the Battle of Plassey, the British took control of Bengal. By then, Mughal authority was largely symbolic. Through Glubb's framework, the Mughal Empire follows a clear arc: pioneers and conquest, commercial expansion and wealth, overextension and internal strain, then fragmentation and collapse. It's a textbook example of how rapid rise and immense prosperity can eventually give way to structural weakness and loss of centralized power. When people hear empire, they usually think of something ancient: the Roman Empire, the vast bureaucracy of the Persian Empire, or the wealth and scale of the Mughal Empire. But when you apply the life cycle model described by Sir Glubb, the pattern feels less ancient and more structural. The United States of America fits into that structure in clear stages. It begins with the age of pioneers and expansion. Early America had a strong sense of shared identity and mission. There was territorial growth across the continent, industrial acceleration, and eventually global projection of power. After World War II, the U.S. emerged as the dominant military and economic force in the world. Institutions were widely trusted. External rivals, especially during the Cold War, reinforced internal unity. That period solidified the U.S. as a global superpower, effectively an empire in reach and influence. Then comes the age of commerce and affluence. The U.S. dominated global trade. The dollar became the world's reserve currency. American corporations expanded worldwide. Wealth creation surged throughout the 20th century. Cultural influence spread globally through technology, entertainment, and finance. Institutions were seen as stable and legitimate. At this stage, like Rome and Persia at their peaks, managing prosperity became more central than expanding territory. Glubb argues that affluence eventually transitions into the age of intellect, often a turning point. In Rome, elite politics intensified. In Persia, court factions weakened unity. In the Mughal system, internal competition and corruption increased after peak expansion. The modern U.S. parallel appears in rising political polarization, expanding bureaucracy, slower decision-making, and declining trust in institutions. Debate increases, consensus decreases. Institutions still function, but public confidence has eroded compared to earlier decades. Wealth concentration is another historical parallel. In Rome, large estates were controlled by elite families. In Persia, wealth pooled around the royal court. In the Mughal Empire, nobles extracted more revenue while reinvesting less into stability. In the United States today, the top 1% owns about 30% of the nation's wealth, and the top 0.1% owns about 14%. That 0.1% represents roughly 1 out of every 1,000 people. If national wealth were $100, that one person alone would hold $14, leaving $86 for the remaining 999 people. Averaged out, one person holds $14, while the remaining 999 would each have about 9 cents. Historically, empires don't weaken because they are poor. They weaken when economic distribution no longer stabilizes society and the middle-class strain increases. Overextension is another recurring pattern. Rome defended too many borders. Persia governed a territory so vast that it struggled with centralized control. The Mughals drained resources through prolonged campaigns. The United States maintains a global military presence, has fought long foreign engagements, and faces growing public fatigue over overseas commitments. Sustaining dominance requires constant economic and military investment. Historically, collapse doesn't mean instant chaos. Rome didn't end. It changed. Persia didn't vanish. It was absorbed. The Mughals didn't disappear. They became symbolic. The USA didn't collapse. It simply was no longer the sole world superpower. History shows that empires rarely collapse overnight. They decline when their systems stop adapting faster than their problems. The United States is not doomed, but it is no longer immune to the pressures that ended past empires.